The cloud makes extensive use of APIs. For those of you not familiar, an API is, which stands for Application Programming Interface, is an easy way to integrate applications across organizational boundaries. And it's also an easy way to integrate applications even within organizational boundaries. So different vendors and different applications can integrate with one another through APIs. So a lot of things on the web work with APIs, and I'm going to show you some examples of that, or an example of that, I should say. There's two basic types of APIs. One is called REST and the other one is SOAP. REST, which stands for Representational State Transfer, is basically an API. I guess the easy way to explain it is you're passing parameters into an application, typically through a URL, but it could also be posting parameters to a posting the parameters as a standard HTTP post. And then getting back in the HTTP response, the answer to your question or the response to that function call or whatever it is that you're calling on another application. Whereas SOAP, on the other hand, is much more structured. So SOAP is a very structured approach to APIs. It stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. And it's probably not anymore as widely used as RESTful APIs. By the way, sometimes we call REST, when people use REST, we call it a RESTful API. You may see that term. So SOAP is much more structured. It uses XML. So typically with SOAP, you construct your SOAP request as an XML file, and you submit that XML either using a GET or a POST. Typically a POST, because it's a little bit easier to do with POST. And then in the response, the web server returns a response, which is also XML. Now with a RESTful API, the response doesn't necessarily have to be XML. It could be pretty much anything. But with SOAP, it's pretty well structured, so it's almost always XML. RESTful APIs can be used by humans. We can pass things into RESTful APIs from a browser, or you can construct the URL that has parameters that will return things that the human can see in the browser. And you'll see an example of that here. I'm going to show you that. Whereas SOAP APIs, typically with SOAP, it's all back end. It's all happening in the background. So let me show you an example of this. So first, at Google is probably a nice, easy example. I'll drag my browser in here. So here's this is Google. Now, most of us are used to, if we're going to do a search, we'll go in and click and do a search, right? Just, like type in some search term. But what if instead of typing the search term here, what if we do this? So I'm going to get rid of everything in the URL. After search, I'm going to put question mark Q equals, I'll put REST API. So because I put that in the URL with the parameter Q, it tells Google, instead of showing the form where you type in whatever you're searching for, assume the user wants to search for REST API and show the results. And there it is, and it shows the results just as if I typed it in to the search box in Google. And you can read documentation on how to call the Google API. So if you go to Google's website, if you go to google.com and just search for Search API, you can read their documentation, which tells you all about all these different parameters that you can pass into a search and how it's going to handle those. You can sign up for an API key so that you can use your API key to call Google. You can use it from within your own website, so you can utilize Google to do search, for example, which a lot of folks do because Google has a great search engine. So that's an example of a RESTful API. And sort of the point of all this, why we're talking about this with the cloud, is many of the applications that we host in the cloud are going to use APIs, and it's important that we understand APIs and how they work if we're going to understand how to secure applications that use those. And why are they so prevalent with cloud? Why are we talking about this with cloud? We could talk about this in any class, really, but with the cloud, most of the time we're deploying applications in the cloud, there's usually some APIs involved. I've already talked about APIs many times. I've talked about APIs for storage in the cloud. So most of the cloud providers use an API to store objects in the cloud. That's all happening through APIs. So that's a good example of how we would use APIs directly with the cloud. And then any applications that we deploy in the cloud, we'll probably do integration using APIs to other applications, either, again, across organizational boundaries or even within our own organization. Or if we want to create some communication between applications running in our own environment and those running in the cloud. So it's very important to understand APIs. I just wanted to give you a quick example of what an API looks like. You can certainly take other courses to learn a lot more about APIs and how they work.